All right, everyone, get ready for a wild ride because today we're taking a deep dive into the lives of Bonnie and Clyde.
Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah, you want to know more about these infamous outlaws? And boy, do we have some fascinating material to cover.
Fascinating.
Picture this: America in the depths of the Great Depression, hardship everywhere, and these two burst onto the scene, robbing banks, leaving a trail of victims.
You know, it's interesting. It's almost like their story became this escape for people during the Depression.
Oh, totally, yeah.
They saw this young couple, defying the banks, the establishment.
Like folk heroes almost,
That's
right?
it.
Especially with the media playing them up as Robin Hood types, taking for the rich.
Right.
Well, not exactly giving to the poor, but, that kind of vibe.
The romanticized image, though, often overshadows a harsh reality.
Sure.
They were responsible for the deaths of at least 9 police officers, 4 civilians.
A dark side we can't ignore. So who were these people behind the headlines?
Let's start with Bonnie Parker. Bright, charismatic girl, full of life, dreams, even wrote poetry.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it suggests a deeper side to her, A brief marriage that didn't work out ended up waitressing in Dallas. And get this, one of the gang members who would eventually kill her was actually a regular customer at that restaurant.
Whoa, that's chilling.
Crazy how fate works, right?
Right.
Now, Clyde Barrow, totally different background.
Yeah.
Poverty, hardship, his time at Eastham Prison Farm, especially the brutality, seems to have fundamentally changed him.
Yeah, I read about him having his toes amputated
Right.
to avoid hard labor. Intense.
That's one of the more shocking details, but context is key here. Clyde was sexually assaulted in prison, and he ended up killing his attacker in retaliation.
Oh, wow.
To get out of hard labor, he had 2 of his toes intentionally amputated, whether by himself or another inmate.
It's hard to even imagine the psychological impact of all that.
His own sister said that prison turned him into a completely different person.
Wow. So we have Bonnie yearning for something more, and Clyde shaped by this brutality and driven by revenge against the system.
Exactly.
How did these two very different personalities connect?
Well, the most believable account suggests they met at a friend's house in West Dallas. Bonnie's making hot chocolate, and Clyde just happens to drop by.
Okay.
Instant connection, apparently.
Love at first sight. In the middle of the Great Depression. What sparked that?
Yeah, was it love, shared ambition, just a need to escape their realities, or a bit of everything?
Right.
Their connection was undeniable, whatever the reason.
And sadly, it led them down a path of crime and violence. But they weren't just robbing banks for thrills, were they?
No, their early robberies, with Clyde's friend Ralph Foltz, it was more about getting the money and firepower to break into Eastham Prison.
Oh, really?
Think about it. Their initial goal, it wasn't riches or fame. It was revenge.
Deeper motivation. Righting the wrongs they felt they had suffered.
Exactly. But things escalated quickly,
Yeah.
from those petty thefts to murder.
Right. Their first victim was a store owner, shot during a robbery, and then they killed their first law enforcement officer. Chilling turning point, like crossing a line with no return.
That first killing of a lawman, Sheriff's Deputy Eugene Moore, in Stringtown, Oklahoma, it really changed things. They were no longer just small-time crooks.
Yeah.
They were cop killers,
Wow.
a threat to society. And soon after that, 16-year-old W.D. Jones joins the gang.
W.D. Jones.
Imagine someone so young drawn into that world.
It's unbelievable.
It says a lot about the times, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Desperation, lawlessness. And tragically, within just 2 weeks of joining them, W.D. committed 2 murders.
Oh, wow.
This gang was becoming more and more ruthless.
Then there's the Joplin hideout. Right. The famous photos of Bonnie with a cigar and a gun. Those images that made them outlaw icons.
Yeah, those photos, they were everywhere. Front
Yeah.
page news,
Right.
Here were these 2 young, attractive, living this life of excitement, defiance, in the face of hardship.
Yeah.
Captured the public's imagination.
But it wasn't a planned photo shoot, was it?
No, it was a result of their carelessness.
Really?
They were holed up in Joplin, Missouri, with Clyde's brother Buck and his wife Blanche.
Oh, all right.
Some say Buck and Blanche were trying to convince Clyde to surrender,
Okay.
but their actions tell a different story. They were throwing parties. Clyde accidentally fired a gun inside the apartment.
Oh, no.
Blanche was known for her extravagant spending.
Not exactly laying low.
No, not at all. When the police arrived, suspecting bootlegging, a huge shootout breaks out.
Wow.
2 officers were killed, the gang barely escaped, but they left behind some crucial evidence,
Yeah.
including those undeveloped photos.
Wow, those photos weren't just images, they were a turning point.
Yeah.
They became symbols of their rebellion, their defiance.
It's almost like they unintentionally created their own legend.
Yeah.
And that legend, well, it was about to get even more complicated.
Right, with Buck and Blanche, those photos, they really did catapult them to this mythical status, didn't they?
Yeah, it's incredible.
But the reality, as we know, was far more complex, especially with Buck and Blanche's involvement. Were they truly just innocent visitors who got caught up in everything?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, some family members claim that Buck and Blanche, they were just trying to, get Clyde to surrender, but their actions at the Joplin hideout, they kind of tell a different story. Attracting attention, throwing parties, not exactly blending in.
Right, not keeping a low profile at all. And then there's the Red Crown Tourist Court incident,
Oh, yeah.
which raises even more questions about their involvement.
The Red Crown Tourist Court, that's where those conflicting accounts really clash.
Okay.
It was July of '33 when the gang, including Buck and Blanche, checked into this tourist court in Platte City, Missouri. Now, here's what makes this so interesting.
What's that?
The Red Crown Tavern, a known hangout for Missouri Highway Patrolmen, was right next door.
Oh, wow. So they were practically hanging out in the lion's den. That's risky.
It's almost as if they were taunting the law. Blanche, she registered them as 3 guests, even though the owner clearly saw 5 people.
Okay.
She also paid for everything with coins, which seems odd.
Yeah.
And she insisted on buying 5 dinners, 5 beers, further contradicting her claim of only 3 guests.
That's pretty suspicious. It doesn't sound like they were trying to fly under the radar.
Not at all. And those distinct jawed purrs that Blanche always wore,
Oh, right.
those weren't exactly common in that area, and eyewitnesses, they still remembered them decades later.
It's as if they wanted to be seen.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if maybe they were drawn to the thrill of it all, the notoriety, the danger.
Right.
Did they embrace this outlaw life, or were they just reluctantly swept up in it?
That's the question. And then it all culminates in this dramatic shootout at the Red Crown Tourist Court.
Right.
The owner, Neil Hauser, he grew suspicious of his guests and alerted the police. They surrounded the cabins, and a fierce gunfight erupted.
So they were surrounded. It sounds incredibly tense.
It was. Now, the gang, they managed to escape thanks to a bit of luck.
Oh, really?
A bullet actually short-circuited the horn on the police's armored car.
Wow.
And the officers, they mistakenly thought it was a ceasefire signal.
What a close call.
Yeah.
But the shootout wasn't without casualties, right?
Yeah, no, unfortunately not. Buck was badly wounded, shot in the forehead, and Blanche was injured as well, nearly blinded by glass fragments. They were desperate, on the run, and Buck's condition, it was deteriorating rapidly.
So where did they go? They couldn't just disappear with those kinds of injuries?
They fled to Dexfield Park,
Dexfield Park.
an abandoned amusement park in Iowa.
Wow.
Imagine that. Hiding out in this place meant for fun and laughter.
Yeah.
But surrounded by the grim reality of their situation.
It's a chilling contrast. They must have been terrified, desperate.
Buck was in and out of consciousness. Things were so dire that Clyde and W.D. Jones actually started digging a grave for him.
Oh, wow.
Locals noticed their bloody bandages and tipped off the police.
Digging a grave for Buck before the shootout? That's haunting.
It really shows you the desperation of the situation.
Yeah.
The park was quickly surrounded by law enforcement. A crowd of onlookers gathered. Another shootout erupted, and Buck was shot in the back.
Oh, wow.
He and Blanche were captured, and Buck, he succumbed to his injuries a few days later.
So Blanche was left to face the consequences alone.
It's a harsh reminder of the reality of their life, isn't it?
Yeah. But Bonnie and Clyde, they escaped Dexfield Park.
They did.
Their story wasn't over yet.
No. Another chapter in their saga of evasion, desperation, but their luck, it was running out. The car accident that left Bonnie with those severe burns,
Right.
that was a real turning point.
Those romanticized images, they often hide the pain and hardship they endured.
Yeah, that accident must have been horrifying.
It must have been.
It was June of '33. Their car went off a bridge.
Oh, gosh.
Bonnie suffered horrific third-degree burns on her right leg. The injuries were so severe her muscles contracted she could barely walk. They were forced to rely on others, making them even more vulnerable. They kidnapped a sheriff, a city marshal,
Oh, my God.
even sought help from a farm family while Bonnie's burns were treated.
Wow, that accident really forced them to confront a harsh reality.
Yeah.
They couldn't keep up their lifestyle with such a serious injury.
It put them in a tough spot. And while Bonnie was recovering, Buck and W.D., They botched a robbery and ended up killing a town marshal. So they were forced
Um,
to flee again, even with Bonnie in excruciating pain.
it's unbelievable how they evaded capture for so long, constantly moving, close calls, narrow
It
escapes.
was a matter of time.
It really was.
And the East Ham prison breakout,
Yeah,
while it might have seemed like a victory for Clyde, his revenge, it ultimately set in motion the events that would lead to their downfall.
right.
Put a giant target on their backs.
And that's when Frank Hamer enters the picture.
Frank Hamer.
The legendary Texas Ranger,
Right.
known for his relentless pursuit of criminals.
He was a formidable adversary.
He was.
Frank Hamer, a seasoned lawman,
Yeah.
former Texas Ranger captain,
Right.
decades of experience tracking down dangerous outlaws, a complete contrast to the romanticized Bonnie and Clyde.
Hirsch.
He wasn't interested in their fame or charm.
Right.
His mission was to bring them to justice. He studied their movements, tracked their patterns,
Hmm.
knew they couldn't resist visiting their
Good guy.
families.
Wow. So Hammer, he was a force to be reckoned with, determined to end their reign of terror.
Absolutely. His involvement, it was a turning point.
Yeah.
Things were about to get a lot more intense for Bonnie and Clyde. Those final weeks, they were a blur of desperation, violence,
Yeah.
and a dramatic shift in public opinion. And it all culminated in that meticulously planned ambush orchestrated by Hamer himself.
It's crazy how quickly things spiraled in those final weeks.
It really is.
We've talked about their crimes, the escape from Dexfield Park, Frank Hamer entering the picture. What happened next? What led to that final showdown in Gibbsland, Louisiana?
Well, the Grapevine murders, they really shifted everything. Public sentiment, which had been, well, somewhat sympathetic to Bonnie and Clyde,
Yeah.
it changed dramatically after those killings.
Right. Is the murders of those two highway patrolmen.
Exactly. In April of 1934, H.D. Murphy and Edward Bryant Wheeler, they were gunned down near Grapevine, Texas.
Yeah, I remember reading about that.
Eyewitness accounts, although later proven false, they depicted Bonnie as a ruthless killer, laughing as she fired those fatal shots.
Wow. And those false accounts, they really spread like wildfire.
Oh, the media had a field day with that story.
Yeah.
It cemented this image of Bonnie and Clyde as cold-blooded killers.
Wow.
The public, already on edge, they were demanding justice.
And Frank Hamer, with his reputation, he was determined to deliver it.
Oh, absolutely, Hamer. He was relentless.
Yeah.
He knew they couldn't resist visiting family, and he used that.
Mm.
He learned that Bonnie and Clyde were planning to meet Henry Methvin's family in Louisiana.
Right.
This was his chance.
So he set a trap for them in Gibbsland.
Precisely. Hamer gathered a posse, Texas and Louisiana officers.
Right.
And they waited patiently along this desolate stretch of highway near Gibbsland. They knew Bonnie and Clyde would be in that stolen Ford V8.
Yeah.
And they were ready.
It's chilling to think about them driving into that ambush, totally unaware.
It was swift, brutal.
Yeah.
As they approached, the posse opened fire.
Wow.
A barrage of bullets, over 130 rounds, riddled the car.
It's a stark reminder that those romanticized versions, the movies,
Right.
they often gloss over the brutal reality,
They do.
the lives they took.
Their deaths marked the end of an era, but it was just the beginning of their legend.
It's incredible, isn't it? Even after all these years, the fascination.
Dude, it's a story with everything. Young love, rebellion, a fight for survival, and a dramatic end.
Mm.
But it also taps into this deeper fascination with the outlaw, that allure of defying convention, the thrill of the chase.
And the story's been told in so many ways.
Oh, yeah.
Movies, books, songs.
Exactly. The 1967 film Bonnie and Clyde really solidified that image of them as romantic rebels, even though it, took liberties with the facts.
Yeah.
And then you have films like 2019's The Highwaymen,
Right.
focused on the lawmen who brought them down, offering a whole different perspective.
It's amazing how their story continues to be reinterpreted, re-examined.
It really is.
But at its heart, it's a human story,
yeah,
full of flaws, complexities, and maybe that's why it resonates with us.
you've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
We're drawn to these stories that explore the darker sides of human nature, stories that challenge us, make us confront uncomfortable truths.
Absolutely. What happened after that hail of gunfire in Gibbsland?
Well, it's remarkable how quickly things shifted from a manhunt to a media spectacle.
Yeah.
News spread rapidly.
Yeah.
People flocked to the ambush site.
A morbid curiosity almost.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That bullet-riddled car, it became a macabre tourist attraction. People taking souvenirs, shell casings, glass, even pieces of clothing.
Wow.
It was chaos.
Yeah.
Fueled by curiosity and this desire to own a piece of history.
And their funerals, especially Bonnie's, they were huge events.
Thousands attended Bonnie's funeral in Dallas.
Wow.
Newsboys even sent this massive floral tribute.
It's a strange contrast, isn't it?
Yeah.
That outpouring of sympathy for someone who participated in such violent crimes.
It speaks to the duality of their image, both feared and romanticized.
Oh, sure.
One detail I find really poignant is that Bonnie, she wanted to be buried next to Clyde.
Oh, wow.
But her family, they refused.
Wow.
Even in death, they were kept apart.
That's heartbreaking. Their story really was destined to be a tragedy.
It is.
Even in their final resting places.
A physical reminder of what brought them down.
It really is.
A reminder that their story, even with all the romanticized elements, it was a collision of choices, circumstances,
Right.
a society in turmoil.
Well, I think we've covered it all, this captivating, complex story.
We have.
Their lives, their crimes, their rise to infamy, their tragic end.
We've examined it all.
We've also looked at the social context, the media's role in creating their legend, and the lasting fascination they hold for us today.
Absolutely. It's been a fascinating journey.
It has.
A reminder that even the most notorious figures, they're human.
Right.
Driven by complex motivations, desires, and circumstances.
That's what makes history so compelling.
Right.
Right? It's not just about dates and facts.
It's about the people.
Yeah.
And the forces that shape their destinies.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the lives and times of Bonnie and Clyde.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be back next time with another fascinating story.